Welcome, friends, to this next Ventures course. And I am delighted to welcome Andrew Sampson here to help lead us. Andrew is the pastor at the Modesto Church of the Brethren in Modesto, California. And that congregation underwent a rather harrowing experience in recent times. And so, Andrew, I invite you to just take it from here, but take a moment to introduce yourself and the church a little bit and help set the stage. And without further ado, I would just like to turn it over to you and let you take us over this course of the next 2 hours, deep into some of the questions that you have for us. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome, and thank you. So yeah, my name is Andrew Sampson, and I'm in Modesto, and I pastored in various parts of the country, having been on both coasts and somewhat towards the middle, growing up there near there as well. I am an MC graduate, but for me that's Manchester and not McPherson, and I guess now it's not MC, it's MU, but MC still for me. Yeah, I'm married. My wife is a professor and also a nurse, and I have 2 boys, one in high school and one feels like he's in high school. So we're busy parents of pets and kids and running a little bit of everywhere. Modesto itself is in the Central Valley of California, so we are in a really highly agricultural based place, sort of like the Midwest, except for our predominant crop are almonds, unless you're from here, and then it's almonds. If you've had an almond or an almond lately, more than likely it was grown in a fairly close proximity. It's a rather large industry here, but it's a really nice place. I really enjoy it, and geographically, it's sort of between Yosemite and San Francisco. Not quite halfway, but it gives you an idea. So, and with that, let us begin. I want to begin tonight by telling a story about that took place as a result of the events of December of 2020. But I want to start a little further into the story than that. I want to start back in March of 2021 when we had our monthly board meeting. And there was a request that had been brought to the board by Darlene, who is the mother of Trevor Seaver, asking the board to consider installing a plaque near the labyrinth in honor of Trevor. The minutes of that meeting show the angst of the board as they sought to balance the needs of the family with the past practices of the church. One concern was that there had not been plaques installed for other individuals, so ultimately it was decided that a memorial brick or 2 could be installed in a walkway alongside others who had donated for such remembrances, and that the chair of the Worship and Spiritual Life Commission, Elaine, myself, and the chair of the deacons would meet with Darlene and discuss this proposal. To summarize that conversation would be to say that the 3 of us met, we talked, we listened, we cried. Darlene stated her appreciation of our support and again asked if the family could donate to the church, this time asking if she could donate a bench that would be identical to the existing benches and have a plaque then installed upon it. A question that was raised at that board meeting and was, if we could say no, then how will the community or how will the neighborhood right here around the church know that we care? That question, I think it feels like it proved to be prophetic about what would take place in the months ahead. At the following board meeting, that would be the April board meeting, the conversation and new recommendation was brought back for further discussion, as well as the observation that a plaque had been installed nearby and in honor of another family that was affiliated with the church under different circumstances. In light of this new realization and a short and yet also incredibly awkward conversation, the new recommendation was passed that a bench with a plaque would be installed in honor of Trevor near the labyrinth. I highlight that story just at the beginning, just to state that the conversations that we will have tonight and the reflections that I have to offer about that time will show some of the messiness, the unpredictability, and the fact that there really isn't a book written trying to help a congregation or pastor or leadership through a situation like this. And so if it doesn't feel all clean and cut, that's somewhat intentional and somewhat just reflecting upon the process as it was, at least for the Modesto congregation and for myself. I would like to pause at this point too and let you know and serve as some warning that there may be some images shown tonight which some of us may find disturbing or troubling. You do not need to view these images if you want. There will be warnings that they're going to be appearing so that you won't be surprised. But if you choose not to view these images, that is completely fine. It will not impact your ability to participate in any further conversations later. But just to let you know that these images will be shown. I'd like to begin or continue with a timeline of what happened on December the 29th of 2020. On that day, I was on vacation. I was not around the church. My family and I had gone to the coast for a few days when I received a text message from our district executive minister, Russ Madison, about what had just occurred at the church. That is to say that there had been a shooting, a police shooting on our property. After a short text conversation with Russ, I then called the church, understanding and knowing that the administrative assistant would be at the church property that day and that she was probably by herself, and to call and check on her well-being as well as to see what other details about the events that had just taken place, what they might be. After finishing up with the phone call with her, I sent several emails and had a conversation, or actually not really a conversation, but read of a conversation through email that was taking place by the local community watch person who also happened to be a part of the Modesto church community, and who had been listening to what had happened on her police scanner. And she passed along several details within that email, which included that, yes, there was a shooting that had occurred at the hands of the police on the church property, and that the man who had been shot also had a gun. That's an important detail for later in the conversation. More conversations, more phone calls, more text conversations with the church board chair, the district executive minister, the head of the deacons, and several other people, as well as searching for local news stations to see what coverage, both newspapers and also on the television, to see if there were any live reports about what was happening in Modesto, at least that I could find while I was on my phone. And so I was able to dig up a few more details about what transpired that day. And so it is that now, because of our access to a 24/7 news cycle, when you search for the Modesto Church of the Brethren in Google, there are some images that appear. Enton, if you could please share those photos now. This first picture is one that was taken from our local newspaper, the Modesto Bee, and this was on, I believe it was on their front cover. And this shows the front of the church property, just the corner of it. away from what the events that had transpired. And Enton, if you could show the second image, please. And this one is disturbing. This picture was shown in the New York Times, but the photo itself comes from the body cam footage of the officer that was involved in the shooting. What you can see him obviously holding a gun, but across what he is pointing across is across our labyrinth and towards a classroom, which is where the man had gathered. Okay, thank you, Anton. Now I'm going to take a moment and watch a video of a conversation that I had with one of our church members about the events, not only of that day, but of the events that were to transpire over the past 12 plus months. This first interview is with Elaine, who is also joining us tonight. Thank you, Elaine, who was one of the first people to be in touch with the family of the man who was killed, and was and continues to be one of our primary contacts with that family. She also is the chair of the Worship and Spiritual Life Commission here at the Modesto Church. One of the responsibilities of that commission is the care and the upkeep of the labyrinth and the area around the labyrinth. Enton, if you could please show that video.
Hi, I'm Elaine Hardy-Forcier, and I think I'm being interviewed because I was one of the first ones to connect with Trevor's mom after the shooting happened. And I just happened, by a little serendipity, to be at the labyrinth site when I saw a car and two people get out, and they went over to the labyrinth, and I said, "By the way, are you related to Trevor?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm Trevor's mom." And I was looking for the church office, but being Sunday, it was closed. And so she wanted to put up hashtag for Trevor, Justice for Trevor signs. And I said, well, gosh, I don't think there would be any problem with that. But, I gave her your name as pastor, and so she could connect with you. And then that's kind of how the connection started. But it really, the connection was really through the labyrinth. Trevor had spent time, a couple times at least, seeking peace and quiet and calm at our labyrinth a couple weeks before the shooting. So his mom and his stepdad would come over after regularly because they lived in the neighborhood, and that was kind of their way to connect with him, after this terrible thing had happened, and to find some sort of peace there, and being reminded that that was the place where he sought that solace. As I ran into Darlene at the site down the road, I began to have more in-depth conversations with her, and I was very touched by her desire to not have something like this happen, this tragedy, to any other mother or any other family, and not to have retribution, but just to work for justice. And she has done a lot to make that happen in our town. And actually, because this wasn't just a headline, it wasn't just a kind of a random news story, we see so much violence. It touched me very deeply because of how it kind of made their lives just such grief, and it changed their trajectory. And so I began getting more involved in politics and signed petitions for justice for Trevor, and just done other things like protests that I really had never done before. And so I am just really appreciative of walking in her shoes a little, and seeing how deeply affected families are, and the whole community, the ripples of the violence and negativity that affect everyone, and the importance of standing up. And I feel like our church really was supportive. There were several people that made connections with her, and she felt, Trevor's mom felt very supported by the church, and she wanted to do something to give back. And so their family wanted to donate a bench and have a plaque for him. And I think initially our church board was given some misinformation that really wasn't needed or appropriate. We weren't doing those plaques, and so we kind of voted it down. I was very disappointed, but we got some other information and past practice that really that was wrong information. And so we met again and we voted to do whatever it was that Darlene and her family felt would be a way to honor Trevor's legacy. So we had a little plaque made, and her family ordered a bench, and so it is there and it's installed, and I'm very pleased, and I think her family's very pleased. And we've also done a couple of events there. We've supported her and the family. And let's see, there was we honored him on his birthday, and also had a labyrinth bench dedication, and the family came to our worship service. They felt very included, and had the ceremony after. And so I felt like the church did something right there. The labyrinth just continues to be a place where they feel welcome. They come to find peace and to feel Trevor's spirit there as they sit on the bench. Darlene even put up some chimes, and you sit and listen to the chimes and think about Trevor and think about how much he means to them. And so who knows where we go from here.
Thank you, Hatton. Misinformation, I think, was an important word in Elaine's statements. Because in this highly chaotic time, multiple narratives emerged of what had happened that day, and more importantly, why they had happened. And the important takeaway with it is that no one had all of the correct details. Conjectures and unsubstantiated claims were rampant within the community, and often were brought into the church because people had questions and concerns. The church also wanted to do something, but at this point, no one knew what to do or how we might go about doing some of the things that we had ideas for. But one of the falsehoods, or the first falsehoods to be disproven, was the narrative about Trevor having a gun. Within a short time, it came to light that he was unarmed and that the officer who had shot him had previously been involved in multiple shootings. However, some of the people that had first put out these, again, details that turned out to be false, were sticking stubbornly to these stories, even when it was shown time and time again that they were not true. As a result of that and several other reasons, we did have people that ended up not returning to the church for a variety of reasons, but the most common one could probably be summarized that we had chosen the side of the family over the side of the police, even though we never made any statements in that regard. Especially after the signs that Elaine again referenced, the Justice for Trevor signs that began to be placed on the church property. And so there were concerns. There were concerns about what was happening, about what wasn't happening, about what was being said or not said, and everything that happened to be out there. However, the most important detail that emerged for us, the most important aspect, was how we could connect with this family and support them in their time of need. We're now going to enter into a time of small group conversation, and I just want to name at the beginning that please feel free in your groups to discuss the question or the questions that feel most important to you and to your group or to the congregation and the community that you are a part of. If you do not get to all the questions, that's okay. They're not necessarily in order, but just to take time for the ones that again are important to you or that you want to spend some time reflecting on with others, and then maybe some conversation that you can take back to the communities, congregations, and groups that you are a part of. Again, and I will not be joining in any of the small groups, but I will be outside, I'll be away. So if you want to come and ask me questions, feel free to do so, or and then you can enter back into your chat groups as well. But I think now Enton has everyone divided up into groups, and we'll be entering into those groups and coming back and having a short amount of time for reflection.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll post the questions that Andrew wants to suggest in the chat, and so that you'll have those available in your chat as you go into your questions. Andrew, would you like to present those questions for people to think about?
Yes, I can certainly do so. So questions to consider. Have you had a tragic or catastrophic event or emergency within your church or within your community in which your church or congregation is or yourself are located? What plans do you have in place for tragic or catastrophic events within your church, or what plans came into being because of past events? What about within your community? What resources do you have immediately available that you can tap into? And these don't have to be resources that are, geographically close to you. Maybe someone that you can reach out to and set up a time to Zoom or even just to talk on the phone and to work through. Or what resources do you know about that exist within your community? And lastly, what resources do you still need? And how might you go about finding them?
Thanks, Andrew. We'll take 15 minutes for breakout sessions, and I'll try to let you know as that time is coming short. And again, if you have questions for Andrew, I'm setting up the breakout room so each of you can leave the breakout, which means that you could talk to Andrew and myself, and then I can put you back into the breakout room if you want to rejoin. So any questions before we start our first 15-minute breakouts? Okay, I'm not seeing any, and so I'll start to put you into rooms now. Well, Andrew, we're coming back from breakouts, and so thank you so much, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, welcome back. Recognizing that we do not have a lot of time for reflection, and we'll just use about 5 minutes. Are there one or two or maybe three groups that would like to share briefly about something that you talked about within your group, or a question that came out of the conversation?
It was mentioned in our group that the police asked to come to the church house and be familiar with what their layout is so that if there was ever a need, they had an advance idea.
Hmm.
It came up in our group that in Kansas, there is an organization that helps with this sort of response and planning. Leslie Fry is the one that knew more about that, but it was new to several of us in the area community. And so using this as an opportunity to research and find out more. And I even suggested talking to people that are kind of like-minded in the policing community to find out the questions we should ask, or in organizations like this that are emergency management organizations. I don't know that I would have any sense of the questions to even start asking to have any sort of plan in place. So.
Well, I know in our group, we had a couple of us had some training where first responders on what to do in an active shooter situation. One was sponsored by a local clinic and hospital, and with us, we offer it through our Police and Clergy Together program and the Dayton Police Department.
Hmm. Let us continue on, and understanding we will have more time for being together and small group conversation here shortly. I just wanted to offer one reflection as well about this time, especially in regards to resources, because I didn't take a class in seminary to prepare myself in any way, shape, or form about this, nor did I even think about the necessity of it. But our district executive minister, Russ, has been present from the beginning. Like I said, he was the first person that I heard from after the shooting. He lives in the community that helps, and he happened to be home, so he was privy to that information rather quickly. But he's not only did he send out a few text messages and call it good, but we've also had multiple conversations since that time. And he was also a source of encouragement for even looking at the possibility of hosting this course. However, even though there were articles in the Church of the Brethren magazine messenger and through the emailed communication newsline, we have not received any contact from the denominational offices at a national level, not a card, not a phone call, text, email, or even a comment on social media. This has been discouraging and hurtful to myself, and I think I can safely say for the congregation as well. Processing the events of that tragic day has fallen upon us as a congregation and its leadership, and we were, like as I said, unprepared and unequipped for what had just happened. We continue to do the best that we can, but we've made several missteps. We've also made several wise decisions and adjustments along the way. I will include my contact information into the chat, so if you would like to add me as a resource to your congregation, community, your church, if such a situation would arise, please feel free to do so. Again, I would not say that I'm an expert, but I am willing to listen and offer any kind of feedback that I can. Let's continue on. I was trying to think about this next section about how we began to make these connections, the connections between the family of the young man who was killed and the congregation, and how that went. And the first image that came to mind was a middle school or a junior high dance. I don't know how many of you have been to one of those wonderful social undertakings, but in my experience, the boys tended to stay on one side of the gymnasium and the girls tended to stay on the other. Eventually, some of the people that were gathered Usually, at least in my case, the girls would make their way to the dance floor. The boys would continue to hold up the wall and watch the girls dancing with more than a little bit of anxiety. Eventually, one of two things would happen. A boy would throw caution to the wind and head to the dance floor, or the music would happen to slow down and the girls would go looking for a dancing partner. And so that would happen for the remainder of the night. The joy of ungainly bodies dancing together would fill the gym. In a similar way, but without the dancing, the church asked the question, who are the Sievers? Remember that even though the Siever family lived near the church and in the community, they did not attend the church. They were not a part of the congregation. There also continued to be a lot of misinformation and half-truths about what had happened that day, which in my opinion made the church hesitant about how much they wanted to be involved or what it was that they wanted to do. These included some anti-police posts that had been made on social media accounts in Trevor's name. There was also the report that he had been recently released from a short incarceration. And so there were lots of uncertainties on our part, as well as the fact that we didn't know them. So what could we do? Yet we persevered and we did attempt to make connections. Elaine shared, and Darlene, Trevor's mother, will hear shortly, of some of those ways, including a birthday party for Trevor. We protested together at various locations around the city. And we also would have prayer with the family when we would be at these protests, trying to draw attention, positive attention, to what had happened and calling for some changes and some accountability. We also met with the family around the labyrinth. There were emails, there were phone calls, there was mutual working together on projects around the church, especially outside. And there was a small group of people who had gotten to know the family and heard more of the story that was not public knowledge. And so there existed this delicate balance between confidentiality and what the church needs to know. A balance that clergy often understand or try to work at. And it's difficult for individuals, and it's even more difficult for a church board when the church board would hear stories that were told in confidence or examples. And so there was this delicate balance about what the board would keep to itself and share only among itself and not include in the public minutes, and what we would be able to share with the congregation in the attempt to bring together a closer relationship between the various sides. And now I would turn our attention to another video. Enton, if you could please share the video with Darlene.
Hi, my name is Darlene Ruiz. I am Trevor Siever's mom.
Darlene, what did you know about the Modesto Church of the Brethren, or did you know anything about the Modesto Church of the Brethren prior to December of 2020?
I did not. I knew the church was here because we live around the corner, but I didn't know the significance of the labyrinth. I learned of that afterwards. Passed by the church a lot walking, but I did not know.
Have you felt supported and or encouraged by the church? And if you have, could you describe one or two ways in which you have felt that way?
Pastor Andrew and Elaine, I have spoken with quite a few times since losing Trevor. Amazing, supportive, and compassionate to me and my family. They helped me put a memory bench in the labyrinth in honor of Trevor. They had a church service in honor of Trevor, and just have really been compassionate and loving. They let us have a 1-year anniversary and a candlelight vigil here in honor of Trevor. So I'm very appreciative of the church and their love and their compassion they've shown me and my family.
Are there things that you wish that the church would have done differently?
When we first wanted to put in the bench, we had, I know it had to go through a committee, and I felt like between Elaine, she had to be the middle person for everything, and maybe had I been able to speak to the committee and come in and talk to the committee myself about Trevor and about what we wanted to do or how we could honor the church and bring something into the church, but also honor Trevor. I know there was a little bit of resistance, not knowing with it being a police shooting, should the church help us and let us memorialize Trevor. So maybe being able to have spoken to the committee and be more in planning it so everybody felt comfortable. I appreciate Elaine. I think she went to bat for us, but I think that maybe some people didn't understand. We wanted to bring something to the church as well as honor Trevor, and I wish I could have told them that maybe.
Thank you, Anton. And I realized that I did not give that video really much of an introduction, but Darlene is the mother of Trevor, the man that was shot and killed on our property. We're going to prepare to enter into another time of conversation in our small groups. And I'll just highlight those questions for you to think about. And again, just to note, there are a lot of questions, and you do not have to answer every single one, but look for the ones that are especially important to you and to the community that you are a part of. Again, I will not be involved in a group, so if you have any questions that you'd like to come and ask me, feel free. But those questions, and Anton I know is putting them in the chat. What percentage of your congregation lives within walking distance of your church, or if you are part of a rural congregation, within a short drive? And I would define short as 5 minutes or less. Do people who do not belong to your church know about your church? What is your reputation within your local community? If you disappeared tomorrow, and that being your church, if your church would disappear tomorrow, would anyone notice or care? I heard this asked at a seminar, and I thought it was a very poignant and also difficult question. And since you are on, next question is, since you are on your computer or some type of device, if you can, take a moment and Google your church's name and see what comes up, especially the images as well as the headlines. Exclude your own social media and website if those exist. And then take another moment and look at the results. Do you like what you see? How do the results complement or conflict with the church's perception of itself? If you do not like what it is that you've found, then how might you go about fixing your image? Or if you do like what you found, then how do you go about emphasizing what already exists? More importantly, even for today's conversation though, is the question about how does or does not the church's public image, reputation, so on and so forth, allow you to connect with your community during a tragic event? Let us now enter into a time of small group conversation.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll send you all to your small groups. And again, we'll have about 15 minutes for you to be able to have time for the discussion of these questions. Any questions before we go? Okay, here we go. Well, Andrew, I think that we're all back now and reconnecting to the large room. So I'll turn it back over to you once again. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Again, knowing that we don't have a lot of time for reflections, are there 2 or 3 groups that would like to share something that they discussed, or any questions that they may have come up with that would be helpful to the group? And I'll let you kind of, I'm probably not going to see you on my screen right away, so if you have something, feel free to unmute yourself and speak. I don't think I see anyone, so, which is fine. So let's take about a 3-minute pause and get up and stretch your legs if you need to, or get a drink of water or whatnot. You may want to leave yourself on mute, but yeah, feel free to get up and move around a little bit, especially for those of you who are a little further east than me, which I think is just about everyone. You may need to move some blood around and get some limbs.
So friends, come back by 15 after whatever hour you're on. So whatever hour 15, come on back and we'll restart then, but take a break. Well, Andrew, I think we're ready for you to move us into the last segment of the course.
Great. For this last section, I have lovingly called it Coming Together. And I was thinking about how I enjoy cooking. And I don't know how many of you do enjoy that as well. But if not, I hope you'll at least appreciate or humor me with this example. But I was thinking about enjoying cooking, and one of the things that I almost never make on my own is mayonnaise. The ingredients are rather simple: Dijon mustard, lemon juice, salt, egg yolks, and oil, plus any number of flavors that you might want to include, like garlic. And the process is relatively easy too. You mix all of the ingredients together in the blender, except for the oil, and then you leave that on and you drizzle it in slowly, and everything begins to form into an emulsion. The reason, though, that I rarely make mayonnaise is that I'm not always the most patient person. And usually I add the oil too quickly or too much at one time. The emulsion breaks, and rather than having deliciousness, I just have a mess on my hands. Guess that's a good moral of the story, is bringing everything together too quickly can ruin the recipe. Bringing together the church and the Seaver family was one of those questions. That was the biggest question. How do we do this, as well as in light of providing care to the family and also being genuine about who we were as a church? There was an added layer of complexity to all of this. And I think you all probably know well what I'm going to say. The added layer of complexity to developing this church-family connection was, and continues to be to a certain degree, the COVID pandemic and the safety of everyone involved. Like all organizations, we had shut down nearly every in-person activity and event beginning in March of 2020, and we did not resume our in-person worship until May of 2021, which is sooner than a lot of communities out here, but still was a rather long time with 60 Sundays. And this does complicate things like trying to build a relationship with a family who you and the congregation does not know. So for approximately 5 months, most of the board conversations were on Zoom. Worship was on Facebook. Office hours for myself and the administrative assistant were cut in half. The number of people around the church property itself was sparse, and the activities within the congregation were nearly non-existent. And although we have returned to a hybrid, an in-person and a streaming to Facebook worship service, we are still easing into regular large group activities. So how could we go about bringing these two groups together? Well, there was one place where the church, the Seaver family, and the neighborhood could come to, regardless of whether the church was open: the labyrinth and the garden space surrounding it. This was a sacred space for the congregation prior to December 2020, and was one of the reasons why the shooting was so deeply troubling to our church, and especially that first picture, or the second picture that we showed you that came from the New York Times of the officer's body cam footage. Accidentally at first, and then more intentionally, this space near the church became one of connection, not only spiritually, but also socially, and in creating new relationships. It was a safe place, again, spiritually and also relationally, as well as being outdoors allowed us to get some distance from one another in the midst of the pandemic, but also be with one another. And the church hosted multiple labyrinth meditations and worked to publicize them beyond our own church and into the neighborhood itself. We have also had conversations with neighbors and also some teenagers who have heard, or who heard the shots that day. And then as they journeyed around the church property, were wondering what this labyrinth is and what it means. Something that I came to realize, not only about the labyrinth, but about the church space in general, which I knew, but until I really saw it with my own eyes and had conversations with people outside of the church to really make it real, was that you do not always know what spaces at your church are being used or even visited by people in the neighborhood or outside of your congregation. As we learned from Darlene, the labyrinth area was a place that Trevor had come to on multiple occasions, and that he had intentionally come to on that fateful day. After the shooting, people brought candles, flowers, wind chimes, and various other items to memorialize the space, some of which raised our own set of questions, as it is in a garden area where there's mulch, and in California with candles and flame does raise a certain amount of anxiety itself. The Seaver family also used this space to have a birthday party and a remembrance for him, at a place where several members of his family had come, and a few members of the congregation attended that day as well. We also know that it is a place where his mother and his stepfather come to on a regular basis, even when no one else is at the church. However, there are many more signs, and we know that there are other people that come and see this space and have come to recognize it as a place where they can find peace and rest as well. We've not met all of them, as I said, but we know that they've been there. They've left little trinkets and memorials, and sometimes even graffiti. As I said at the beginning, the Seaver family graciously asked if they could dedicate and donate a bench that would be identical to the other benches that are already in that area in memory of Trevor. In conversation with the family, it was agreed that there would be a dedication of the bench and the plaque on November the 28th, 2021, which is also the first Sunday of Advent, Hope. And we also recognize that it had been almost a year since he had died and been killed. That Sunday, we had a regular morning worship gathered both in the sanctuary and online. And we concluded it with a song and then began to make our way into the labyrinth and garden area space, those of us who were in person anyway. And we gathered there on that warm day with the Seaver family and nearly everyone who had been in attendance at worship that Sunday, again in person. A special part of the dedication time came when the family was asked to share with us, the congregation, the church, their stories and their memories of Trevor. I can say there were not many dry eyes afterwards. It was a powerful, powerful time. Afterwards, especially in the week after, I had a number of people call or contact me, or even some in person, including a few board members, and express how much more connected they felt to the family and how they had learned during that memorial and dedication service. They had learned so much about who this young man truly was from his family, from the people that knew him best, rather than through the stories and the rumors and the misinformation that existed then and even continues to exist to this day. It was and remains one of the highlights of our time and our connecting of the church and the family and the neighborhood. In a moment, we'll be watching a third video. And the last of these video reflections comes from the Modesto Church of the Brothern's board chair, Kim, who began her first term as board chair in January of 2021, just a few days after the shooting. Kim and I have had many, many conversations, phone calls, emails, and Zooms, text messages, just about every form of communication there probably exists since that fateful day, as we have worked together and with the board and with the family and with the church itself to navigate the congregation through this time for which we really didn't necessarily know what we were doing, but trusting each other and trusting God that we would get through it. Enton, if you could please show that video now.
Greetings, my name is Kim Boardman. I am the board chair of the Modesto Church of the Brethren congregation, and in 2021, I was the brand new incoming board chair, coming in directly following the tragic shooting that took place on our church campus. And so I'll start off addressing the question, what concerns or hopes did I envision for the church after hearing the news of the shooting? I have to say it was quite overwhelming, and I did have to ask myself, what is my responsibility in guiding our congregation through such a tragedy when I myself didn't have a clue what my own response really was, besides shock and dismay and horror and deep, deep, deep sadness. To start off, just at the very beginning, there was so much conflicting information about what actually happened and how it took place. The media didn't have everything straight, and our members didn't have all the information. And so just that part of it, there was an element that I recognized right away as a leader with just being patient and letting the story unfold so that we didn't have too much of a knee-jerk reaction to what we were hearing right away. And I guess that was the first thing I was trying to tell myself, was be patient. Let's wait to see what we actually find out from this situation. As far as what role the church had in this event, that was a major question I was asking myself. Do we have a responsibility to the community? And how do we heal ourselves? How do we heal our families? How do we heal our community? We pretty much right away decided to put a message on our marquee that's on the corner where the traffic passes, saying something to the effect of that we are grieving with you. We kept it very neutral. You need to understand that this was a police shooting, and this was at a time, a very supercharged political time, with Black Lives Matter and defunding police and all of the COVID distrust and media distrust. It was a really, really difficult political time to navigate, but stay true to ourselves as a church that wanted to serve the people in need, including ourselves. And so that was one of the most significant parts for me. What do we actually put on a marquee that the public is going to see? And I think we ended up just saying, we are grieving with you, because certainly no matter where were on a political spectrum, there was grief in all manners. And so for me, that was the most important, to just let people know that we're all in some way sharing this burden. For me, especially, I leaned heavily on other leaders within our church, people with just more experience with leading, since I was new to this position. Many conversations with Pastor Andrew, and with other members, some of them who had engaged more directly with the family immediately. In terms of how the church has changed since December 2020, I think we're all still grieving in some way or another, and me always. Our labyrinth area, which was built as a place of peace and knowing God's grace and sanctuary, will never be the same for many of us. And that's heartbreaking. And yet it has become also a place of tremendous healing. And I think part of that was eventually working our way through all of our channels and the slow moving way that boards move, of inviting the family to use that space in a way that allowed them to heal as much as they could. and be gracious as much as possible to them in ways that were comfortable for everyone. I feel that our church has truly become more compassionate in that way. I will speak for myself personally. It was interesting working with a family that we never knew before and was asking us if we would make some changes on our property for them, and trusting. We had to build trust between us. It was a really, for me personally, it was a unique process in building that and learning to just let go and be compassionate as much as possible. How our facilities are used has long been a debate among our congregation, and I feel like that since this experience, there's been more and more talk of, my gosh, where is the compassion? Just be compassionate. Who cares if there's wear and tear? What is the compassionate thing to do needs to be the very first question that we ask ourselves every single time. And I hope that our church has learned to step more in that direction. I hope that I personally have. That offering what we have and sharing God's grace is way more important than what happens to our property. And finally, a word of encouragement that I can leave for churches and communities, as you may or may not ever need to wind your ways through a tragedy. I think the biggest lesson I've learned is being patient with listening and prayer. In working with the grieving family, they have their own community, and it became clear that they were simply asking our church for the grace to grieve their loss, but in partnership with us, and to trust that partnership. And they've taught us a lot, I believe. They've taught me a lot in how to be gracious and compassionate. I also learned that grief looks very, very different for different people. Different people get through it more quickly than others, and there's no set timeline for dealing with grief. And that became very, very evident as even the community dealt with this in terms of the police officer that was involved and how people felt about whether the police officer was to be held accountable or not, and all of the politics involved with that. Everyone dealt with it differently. We have since dealt with graffiti on our property related to this issue. Even though our property simply was the place where this young man found himself and the police found him. It's just a matter of listening, being patient, and remaining compassionate, and having the faith that all of it will unfold in time. Thank you.
Andrew, I'll let you unmute. And
there we go. In a moment, we will be entering into small groups once again for further conversation and reflection. And I just wanted to share with you those questions. Is there a space at your church which is accessible to church and community alike if the building itself is not open or there is not a function at the church? Consider how you could create a new space or renovate an old area to be more hospitable. What is the worst case scenario if someone from outside of the congregation comes and asks your church for a favor, such as when the Modesto congregation was asked to place a plaque or a bench in memory of Trevor? Would you describe your congregation as dogmatic or people-oriented when making decisions? What are the sacred spaces, traditions, and so on and so forth within your church that may need some explanation to visitors? If you're a member of the Church of the Brethren, you may consider Love Feast. How might you welcome visitors into these new spaces and rituals? And lastly, well, I guess I have two more. How can a place or a space provide hospitality and pastoral care to strangers, visitors, and members alike? And lastly, I leave you with a summary of Kim's question. How might saying yes to a request open your congregation up to new possibilities? We will now enter into a further time of conversation.
We've got just a little over 10 minutes for this breakout room, so we don't go over. And so I posted the questions in the chat. Any questions before we go into our final breakout session of the evening? Okay, here we go. And the rest of us are coming now. Well, welcome back, everyone, from your third and final breakout group. And so, Andrew, we've got about 10 minutes left, and so I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, I wanted to, welcome back, and just to see if there were any groups, 2 or 3 groups that would like to share briefly any reflections that you wanted to share with the larger group, or questions perhaps.
I heard a couple of questions in our group, Andrew, about whether the congregation interacted with the police in any way, had any intentional or unintentional engagement with that community, particularly with the political climate that was happening.
Yeah, that is a great question. There was, I think, a small amount. I wouldn't say it's large, and part of it is me thinking that because with COVID and not as much together time, it's hard to judge exactly. But I know there was some. Again, it was some was through protest presence, both on their part and on our part. There was also some conversation with the police investigators when there's a shooting, especially when police are, police shooting, investigators go to the scene, but not a lot, no. And a lot of the encounters were accidental more than intentional.
Just to kind of piggyback on that, how I don't know where Modesto stands on this, but like how did this whole I don't know, tragedy like kind of influence Modesto's response to the calls that were going on in our country at the time, highlighting police brutality, defund the police, and granted, Trevor was white. This is the big thing for Black Lives Matter is like, so how has Modesto, if you have begun like working with those things in light of what happened?
Yeah, Modesto has begun to, well, not begun. They began a while ago. creating new initiatives and working at providing, and I'm going to bungle the name, but I think it's the Moving Forward Together group, in which they're beginning to put together a civilian review board to review cases like this. So that's been a positive step. There's also been the presence, or I think they've started just rather recently, of having non-uniformed social workers, mental health experts coming in and being involved in cases like this. So there has been a lot of, and that is partly because of Trevor, and partly, mostly probably because of the Black Lives Matter. And that has gotten a lot of support, both especially from the city police chief, but also from the county sheriff. So there has been a lot of really positive movement in that regard.
What, Andrew? One of our members applied to be on that civilian review board.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, right? Jim Costello?
Yes, I did.
So
and just to flesh out, if I may, the Church of the Brethren is one of about 15 organizations that is supporting a initiative to create an independent police auditor along with a commission. And the city of Modesto has created, as Andrew said, a committee called Forward Together, in which Mrs. Ruiz is on it, and as well as multiple others. It's about a 23 or 24 member commission or group, and they're studying the issue, and it looks like they're heading toward the independent auditor model. It's not, of course, the city has to approve whatever they come up with, but the Church of the Brethren Modesto was one of the signers onto that initiative. There are about 15, like I said, organizations who've signed onto it. And a group committee created a set of legal guidelines based on other cities that turned out to work as a model. And so we'll see how that goes. But the Trevor's shooting just sort of added. It was already started because of the Floyd shooting, but the Trevor Seaver shooting just added impetus. Here's an example of where we need to have something like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so hopefully we will proceed positively in that regard.
I'm really glad to hear the responses from Elaine and James, but I understood Eric's question when he said Modesto to not mean city, but the congregation. And so it would be interesting to have you all
Yes,
reflect.
that is correct, Itten.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting to have you all reflect on how the congregation has responded or changed having been part of this.
I think one way has been being more visible and signing on to like the petition that Jim was talking about. Not necessarily, being out there and erring on the side of justice. Maybe not the right term, but trying, going. That's been, I think, a bigger part of who we are, being a larger part, as well as there's been more work, not just in social justice causes, but in service-oriented programs for the community. We have one Sunday a month we go out and we do projects around the community or the neighborhood before we come back for worship. So that's just a small example, but that's one of the ways that we've changed. We've begun to look outwards more.
I wanted to say I loved your question about saying how can a request open up new possibilities. I think and that could be very well within the church. I'm always trying to get people to come up with ideas and things to try and new possibilities, and of course we want it to be from inside, but you were thrust upon this from the outside, and that even creates so much more dissonance. And so I just want to say yay to new possibilities.
I also wanted to get to Monica's question that I accidentally missed before the breakout session. So I'm going to scroll back up to that. If it's okay, Monica, I'll reread it, or you can read it. You wrote it. It's a great question. It says, having navigated all this because it was necessary, instead of making a plan for the tragedy and grief of this sort before anything happens, what resources would what would I and the congregation still want and need around this preparation and response? That is that's a really good question. And I'm not laughing at the question. I'm laughing at, wow, I feel really unprepared to answer that question. But I'm trying to think. So I'm gonna still have to chew on that one for a little bit, but that's
inspired by your own question. And I think the second breakout time when you asked what resources we would need, and I'm really curious, like many of us have not been forced to consider this in the way Modesto has. And so now that you've moved a little farther down the line, yeah, and there's not an immediate answer. I completely understand, but I'm just curious in your thinking, like, where are the gaps still? Certainly this support denominationally, there's some conversation around that and possibilities, or at least that I heard, but yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that's one area. And I don't think that's priority number one necessarily, but yes, it's definitely something that would be nice given the opportunity to address. Not sure exactly how, but it would be nice. And then and there's, I think maybe needs to be developed a little bit further, as well as the resource about what do we do as a congregation when there are other dangers, other dangers or things that we have brought to our attention. We learned the other day, for example, the Boogaloo Boys, who are an violent extremist organization, were not happy, and that's an understatement, but not happy with the firing of the officer that was involved in the shooting. And they are very much aware. The police chief has received threats, and we've not received any direct threats, but it's understandable that if they know, if it's been brought to their attention, they obviously know where everything happened.
Well, friends, we're just about at the end of our time, and I want to respect those of you who have joined us from many different time zones. And so as we draw to a close, I want to allow Andrew to share a few more words with us. But Andrew has also offered to stay after the course concludes if anyone still wants to chat for just a few more minutes. So this doesn't mean that we're going to cut off all the conversation, but even more, Andrew has put his contact information in the chat. And so he's also offered that if you want to be in touch with him in the days following, that feel free to reach out and contact him. And Andrew, we appreciate you being a resource to people and being willing for that conversation to continue as well. So with that said, Andrew, do you have a few last thoughts that you want to leave us with tonight?
Sure. Yeah, just a few. I recognize we're at our time. But first is that I hope that you, your church, and your community never have to experience something like this. But understanding that it's good to be prepared for the things that you never need. Again, I put my email address in there, my phone number I put in earlier as well. Feel free to contact me, and if I can help you in any way, I will try to. Again, I'm not an expert, but I will offer you whatever assistance I can. Secondly is knowing that every church, neighborhood, and situation is different, and you are the expert about what is needed within your church, your neighborhood, and your community. And you don't worry about if you do everything perfectly, because it probably is not a perfect solution. At least I certainly hope so in my case. As well as knowing that the relationship between the church and the community and the family may naturally dim. That may not always be a really strong connection, and that's okay. There, give yourself some permission there. And at times it may grow stronger than at others. Additionally, as you probably could tell from the presentation, and as I said earlier, this is not a linear process. You may think that you have moved on or are nearing the end of the journey, only to find yourself and your community drawn back towards the beginning. This is grief, and it is difficult. But work with your churches and your neighborhoods and your communities can build resilience and stronger relationships. Lastly, I want to acknowledge and thank once again Darlene, Elaine, and Kim for their help in the videos in which they appeared and their wise words. Thank you, and thank you all.
And thank you, Andrew. We appreciate you shepherding us in this conversation tonight through how to look at a tragedy and to try to think of ways through it, and maybe for us to be a little more prepared should something come our way. Thank you for your leadership tonight.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.
Friends, that concludes our course. Those who wish to stay and chat a little bit, you're welcome to, but those that need to go, you're welcome to go now. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And please tune in for our other Ventures courses.